It's an important distinction here. There's the trade battle, then there's tech, and then there's somewhere in between. And the degree that the U.S. government has been kind of cornering Huawei here is a tough position to back off from. So, for example, on the trade side and the tariff, we could have an outcome where the powers come together and there's some announcements about new lower tariffs. But that doesn't change some of the branding now that's happened around Huawei as basically an actor for the state. And so I think that Huawei's they're in a tight position here, and I want to try to enumerate that quickly, is that they have 24% global market share of smartphones. About 2/3 of that comes from outside of China. In that segment, if there are components that are being pulled back or services like Google that get removed, undoubtedly that's going to have a negative impact on their demand. And so to put it in the most simple way, I think this is some significant damage that's being inflicted to Huawei that's going to be hard to reverse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you did that because it's not a household name in the U.S. Ed, I mean, 180,000 employees work at Huawei. Who's the most exposed in terms of U.S. names? I mentioned some of the chip sector. What's that interrelationship like?
Well, in terms of the U.S. suppliers, go ahead.
Oh, no, Ed, that was for
ahead,
you.
Ed.
Okay, sorry. So, yeah, some of the U.S. suppliers, the most exposed is a company called Qorvo, which sells a lot of the components that go into those handsets. Skyworks is in there. Broadcom's got a little bit of exposure. And then you've got some semiconductor guys like Cree who provide wafers for them. Most of that will be dislocated short term and then come back over the long term because that goes into the phones. And what Huawei winds up not selling in phones, Samsung will, and all those guys supply Samsung too. So it's mostly a short term dislocation. There will be some probably long term problems with revenue because the effect of this, is just pointed out, is going to cripple Huawei, not just in phones, but especially in base stations for cell towers, because China is going to have to slow down their 5G rollout, and the rest of the world is going to slow down purchases for Huawei on the base station side, and that won't come back anytime soon.
Gene, should companies like Apple be concerned that there could be retaliation, whether direct or just more generally, some kind of boycott of American brands in China?
Unfortunately, Wilfred, I think that they should be concerned about that. And to quantify that risk is 15% of Apple's revenue comes from what they refer to as broader China. Probably about 10% of that revenue comes from mainland China. And I think that when you try to assess Apple's risks, I'm still a firm believer that Apple is vastly undervalued right now, and there's tremendous upside. But let's talk about the next few months here and break down this tariff into two pieces. One is tariffs on potential products coming into U.S., and I think the probability that Apple falls under that is extremely low. The second is the risk about China, like you're talking about. I think that that is a moderate to a high risk, that when you see little things, subtle things like Game of Thrones not being shown in China, there's ways in social media and that can recoil and have a negative impact on Apple's iPhone business or their broader business in China in the months to come.